Not to spoil, but this is just an updated version of KingdraCenter. It's a bit more technical, but the idea is still the same, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense at first glance. You'd be thinking, well, you want 4 energy on this Kingdra so it can actually attack with rapids. Why would you discard those energy by using a Pokemon Center? Or Pokemon Nurse in this case. Well, the answer is in the Pokepower Water Cyclone. You can move all of the water energy off of Kingdra from your active spot onto a Pokemon onto your bench. But Shuckle, that would leave a Kingdra in the active position with no energy and a retreat cost of 3. Warp energy. Play Warp energy onto that Kingdra and it's gonna move it to the bench. And then whatever Pokemon you previously moved all those water energy to is gonna go to the active position. And then you're gonna use Kingdra's Pokemon power to move all of the water off of that Pokemon in the active position back onto Kingdra. Then you retreat the active Pokemon, if you can, to put Kingdra right back where it was. But all healed up from the Pokemon Nurse that you played right before the Warp Energy. But Shuckle, what do you do when you run out of Warp Energies? You won't, because you play Espeon. And its Energy Return Pokemon power lets you return that Warp Energy right back to your hand as soon as it's played, basically. As soon as you use its effect, you can put it back in your hand with Energy Return. Plus, Espeon has free retreat, so it's a perfect partner for just swapping into the active position and then retreating back into Kingdra so that you can heal up without losing any energy whatsoever. And that's the deck. You just do this. Leading up to it, you just attach water energies onto Kingdra, just working up towards that Rapids attack, which is costly. But Kingdra has 120 HP, and you can completely heal it 4 times in a single game. 50 damage is a solid chunk, and it does have the chance to discard an energy off of the defending Pokemon, which is something that most decks aren't prepared for. There is an energy removal, but it's a depowered version of it in E-Card, so not a lot of decks run it. Not a lot of attacks discard energy, but this deck does both. Rapids can discard energy, and we're running energy removal too. Both the number 2, like it's printed on the card, but also TOO. Using energy removal 2 early game is a pretty great way to stall out your opponent. It can more than make up for the 4 turns of energy attachment that you have to build up to with Kingdra to even get an attack off. Not that Seadra doesn't have any good attacks, it's just that the main point of the deck is to use Rapids. Now let's start talking some deck list. It seems like every time we get to the deck list segment, I'm always saying, most decks run the 40 HP version of this basic Pokemon, but I like the 50 HP version. And that's true again for this one. This Horsea cannot attack for 1 energy like the 40 HP one, but I do like having that 10 HP cushion. I like the artwork on it too. As stated earlier, Seadra has some pretty good attacks that you can utilize while you are attaching energy, getting powered up to 4 water energy so that when you evolve up into Kingdra, you can go ahead and use Rapids. Wave Splash and Water Bullet are gonna be good for dealing a chip and a chunk respectively, potentially setting up for a KO when you do evolve up into Kingdra and use Rapids. This deck's gonna be running a 4-4-4 line of Kingdra. A bit sad that Kingdra does not have a resistance, but it has a great weakness because Lightning is definitely the weakest type in E-Card. That being said, a lot of Fire-type decks are going to run Zapdos just to deal with Kingdra. Kingdra is a bit slow in the beginning because it's a Stage 2 deck that requires 4 energy, so early game you're going to be a bit sluggish. In E-Card, that's not necessarily a bad thing, as most decks are Stage 2 decks, and quite a few of those Stage 2 decks require a lot of energy as well. So it's more about just getting a more solid setup in those early turns than your opponent. If you start with an absolutely horrid hand, you do have a couple copies of Lapras in here to help you salvage that. It can use its assist attack to pull a supporter out of your deck and completely save your hand with something like a Professor Oak's Research, or even just a Pokemon Fan Club, really. Gonna be running 4 copies of Eevee in this deck. Now, you don't need a heavy load of Espeon in this deck, but Eevee is also an option for some other evolutions that make really great coverage options. In this case, we're going to be looking at Flareon, so I do run one copy of Flareon in this deck as well. That's to deal with all of the grass type shenanigans that we've already covered on the channel. Espeon can hit your big heavy hitters like Vileplume and Exeggutor for weakness, so any grass type that Espeon isn't hitting for weakness, Flareon will. And with 4 copies of Eevee, you might have to worry about starting the game with an Eevee in the active position, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because Eevee's charge up attack, man, if you can hit that coin flip and actually get some energy acceleration on your first turn, it's not bad. You can evolve up into Espeon next turn and free retreat it to the bench. You get to hold on to that energy. The supporter base is made up of the usual suspects. Got a full play set of Fan Club, full play set of Petum. That way you're covered on getting your basics and your evolutions for your setup. Running 3 copies of Professor Oak's Research, and 3 copies of Underground Expedition to cover your search and draw capabilities. Where we deviate is with a full playset of Pokemon Nurse. Because this is a KingdraCenter deck, you're going to be healing a lot. You want to make sure you can heal as much as possible, so a full playset is necessary in this deck. Going to be running a full playset of Energy Removal 2 as well. This is a card that a lot of decks want to run because, you know, even if you're only hitting half of those coin flips, you're still doing considerable damage to your opponent's setup depending on when you hit them with an Energy Removal. The problem is that you have to make room for a playset of them to really make it worthwhile, because you are going in anticipating that you are going to miss half of those coin flips. The card itself just doesn't have enough consistency to justify booting out other consistent cards like your supporter base in order to fit it in there. On top of the trainers and supporters, we're going to be running a full playset of Warp Energy, which is going to be necessary for pulling off that Kingdra Espeon combo, and then 4 copies of Rainbow Energy as well. That way, you're not just, you know, chucking an Espeon out into the active position without the ability to attack. Same thing for Flareon. You want them to be able to actually utilize their attacks, especially Flareon's second attack, where you get much more bang for your buck if you're discarding a fire energy. That rainbow energy is going to count for fire. And then the rest of the deck is going to be filled out with water energy. The gameplay for Kingdra is going to be very typical of E-Card. You know, the first 3 turns of the game are just spent leisurely gathering resources, getting all the cards you know you're going to need, so that on turn 4, when the real strategy kicks in, you can start getting all of these unique interactions between your Pokemon, start moving your Pokemon and your energy around, responding to what you're seeing across the table from you, what your opponent has played, to really just maximize your strategy from that point moving forward. But early game is all set up. I did mention that fire decks often run Zapdos as a way to help deal with Kingdra. Well, if you're anticipating some mirror matches, go ahead and chuck a Zapdos in here as well. If you're not worried about those grass decks, if they're just not in the metagame that you anticipate playing around, then get rid of an Eevee and a Flareon and put 2 copies of Zapdos in there. Even with type advantage, Typhlosion can be a little bit tricky to go up against because its heat up Pokemon power is basically asking you to hit it with energy removal. Typhlosion builds are just another stage 2 deck that's faster than Kingdra, so don't get too cocky with the type advantage because Typhlosion matches up pretty well with Kingdra despite that. You can't just go into it with your normal strategy of like, okay, well, I'm just going to play all 4 energy removal 2s from my hand. You're still pretty safe from any attack you're going to get hit with from a Typhlosion or even a Ninetales. No matter how much damage you get hit with, you're going to be able to heal it off anyway. My point is, don't give your opponent any more of an advantage than they would have had going in. Kingdra is one of the few decks that I think has a pretty even matchup against Scizor in E-Card, because early game you can stand to take some heavy metal attacks just because you are going to be able to heal that damage off, but once you start firing off Rapids and once you start playing those energy removals from your hand, you're going to be able to knock off a lot of the metal energies attached to Scizor, which is where its advantage comes from, is by having multiple metal energy on it. Because with the Scizor matchup, yeah, they can power charge and get those special energy back, but they can only do that 4 times, when you can just fire off Rapids and hope for an energy discard as many times as you need to. On their side of the field, they know that you can only play Pokemon Nurse 4 times, so then it becomes a game of allocating damage efficiently to play against Pokemon Nurse. The main thing that destroys Kingdra is special conditions, which is something you're going to see a lot of, especially in those grass-type matchups. If your active Kingdra has any type of special condition on it, it can't move those energy away to heal up. You're either going to have to discard a lot of energy off of it when you use Pokemon Nurse, or use a Warp Energy to get it onto the bench and just not worry about healing. But, you know, it's not going to completely shut down the strategy you have between Kingdra and Espeon, but it can definitely delay it while you scramble to figure out how you're going to remove these special conditions, deal with the opponent's active Vileplume or Beedrill or whatever it is, and then also come back to your Espeon Kingdra healing combo later. It really just delays this deck and slows it down even further, which is not good for Kingdra. You don't want to get slowed down any further when you're a slow deck to start with. If this is a problem that you keep running into, you can always try to make room for full heal and or switch. Switch is the more solid option in my opinion, because Espeon has free retreat. You're just going to be able to get a lot more usability out of switch than you are full heal. Warp Energy is going to be able to save you most of the time, but not all of the time, and so having some backups in switch or even full heal, if you're feeling frisky, or if you're just sick and tired of playing against Beedrill. As always, let me know down in the comments what you think about this deck, what you think about these cards, any experiences you've had running this deck. I always like hearing about people's experiences on TCG1 in the decks that they absolutely hate going up against. Some of my playtesting was done on TCG1, and I definitely have my heroes and villains of E-Card. Also, tell me your requests and the type of content that you would like to see on the channel in the future. I always like that type of input. Maybe leave a like for the algorithm. Social media links are down in the description, and I'll see you next video.